Previously on Dying to Be In, for our first episode, I told you about Caleb Wilson, the 20-year-old Southern University student who died in February 2025 during a hazing ritual for Omega Psi Phi fraternity. I showed you how his death mirrored that of Robert Bazile, who died in 1977, nearly half a century earlier, during an Omega Psi Phi initiation at the University of Pennsylvania. But there's another link in this tragic chain. Another young man whose life was cut short in the pursuit of brotherhood. A death that proves this isn't just about isolated incidents or coincidences, but about a deadly pattern that has persisted for decades. If you haven't subscribed yet, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. These stories need to be told. And with your support, we can bring more awareness to hazing deaths that have been forgotten or overlooked. No one should have to die for brotherhood or sisterhood, and together, we can help prevent more tragedies like the one I'm about to share. In February 1978, 1 year after Robert Bazile's death, 20-year-old Nathaniel Swinson, a junior at North Carolina Central University, collapsed during an off-campus fraternity initiation. Like Caleb Wilson nearly 5 decades later, Swinson was participating in physically demanding exercises as a part of an Omega Psi Phi pledge process. According to 1978 newspaper reports from the Durham Sun, Swinson was brought to Durham County General Hospital on a Sunday morning after complaining of cramps and dizziness after running several miles and doing exercises as an Omega Psi Phi fraternity pledge. He was pronounced dead on arrival. What happened in the hours before his death paints a disturbing picture of the dangers of hazing rituals. Fellow students Edmund Purdy and Kenneth Kantz told police they stayed up most of the night with Swinson after he became ill. According to their account, Swinson was among a group of 15 line pledges, as they are called, who were required to do exercises and run from Shannon Manor Clubhouse to Broadmoor Apartments, an estimated 4-mile journey. When the run ended around 3 a.m., Swinson was sweating heavily and had fallen into a ditch. The pledges reportedly began running wind sprints among the apartments after resting half an hour, and Swinson collapsed from cramps. He was taken into an apartment, placed in a tub of hot salt water, and given a glass of salt water at his request, according to witnesses. He was then wrapped in several blankets about 2 hours later to keep him warm. He asked to go to a hospital around 8:30 a.m. On his way to the hospital, Swinson drank a bottle of apple juice, became very dizzy, and could not hold up his head. It was too late. By the time he arrived at the hospital shortly before 10 a.m., Nathaniel Swinson was dead. A university spokesman noted that the National Fraternity's local chapter had been suspended from operating on campus over a year earlier because of, quote, some infraction of school regulations. That's right, the chapter was already suspended when Nathaniel died. The university launched an investigation, quote, to see as far as possible that things like this don't happen again, end quote. But as we know all too well, they did happen again, and again, and again. A later report from the News and Observer in 1986 confirmed what had only been suspected at the time of Nathaniel's death. An autopsy showed he died of sickle cell anemia, marked by physical stress. Now, before I go on, I have to tell you that Nathaniel was a student athlete. He played football for NCCU. I would imagine that football practices and games required a lot of him physically, but in all of his years of playing football, he had never died. So I can only say that it seems like the physical exertion that it took to get through his pledging process must have been extreme. This young man was subjected to miles of running, physical exercises, and ultimately death. all in the name of brotherhood. What makes this story even more tragic is that Nathaniel's death occurred just 1 year after Robert Basil's death at the University of Pennsylvania, again also during Omega Psi Phi initiation activities. 2 deaths in 2 years at 2 different universities in one fraternity. And now, nearly 5 decades later, Caleb Wilson has died under strikingly similar circumstances: physical hazing, delayed medical attention, and a young life cut short. This is more than a coincidence. This is a pattern. It's important to note that North Carolina already had anti-hazing laws on the books when Nathaniel died. According to reports, 10 years before his death, the North Carolina legislature passed an amendment to a 1913 law, adding punishment by a fine not exceeding $500, imprisonment not more than 6 months, or both. That 1913 law itself was passed after a freshman at North Carolina State University drowned after being thrown into a lake by fellow students in May of 1912. Laws were in place. Chapters had been suspended. Warnings had been issued, and yet the deadly rituals continued. Now, in 2025, we're seeing this same pattern play out with Caleb Wilson, the same fraternity, similar physical hazing, delayed medical attention, a promising young life lost. The parallels are chilling. Both Nathaniel and Caleb were 20 years old. Both collapsed during physical hazing exercises for Omega Psi Phi. Both died after delayed medical attention. Both were students with promising futures. Both young men were loved by their fellow classmates. Now, like I said earlier, according to previous reports, Omega Psi Phi had its charter revoked in 1976 on the NCCU campus in connection with several hazing incidents that were physically abusive. The fraternity reorganized in 1977, and then in February 1978 is when Nathaniel died. Yet, even after that tragedy, the pattern continued. In April 1986, the News and Observer reported that a fraternity member at North Carolina A&T University had been charged with several accounts of assault and hazing incidents where 7 students were hit on the head with a dictionary and a 2x4, and one pledge's beard was set on fire. A 20-year-old named Stephen Jones turned himself in to face hazing charges. The charges were serious: 5 misdemeanor counts of assault, 1 count of assault with a deadly weapon, 2 felony counts of assault with a deadly weapon inflicting serious injury, and 2 misdemeanor counts of hazing and battery. The details are disturbing. Jeffrey Henderson had his beard set on fire, resulting in scarring. Arnold Dawes was hit on the head, arms, and shoulders with a 2x4. Clemente McWilliams was hit on the right side of the head with a 2x4, resulting in a blood clot. Patrick Curry was hit on the head with wounds that could not be closed with stitches. John Peterson was hit on the head, arms, shoulders, and legs. Leroy Sharp was struck on the front of the head with a 2x4. Lawrence Robinson was hit on the front of his head, and Alexander Dawson was hit on the left side of the head and needed 7 stitches. These 8 students were pledging Omega Psi Phi and were injured during what was called Hell Week, traditionally the last and most difficult week of the fraternity pledge period. All but one of the students were assaulted, according to the charges. Then in 1989, history repeated itself at the same university where Nathaniel Swinson had died. The Durham Sun reported that members of that chapter of Omega were suspended from North Carolina A&T University after a weekend hazing episode injured 2 pledges, one of them being the sophomore class president, Paul Woodson, who was admitted to the Durham County General Hospital complaining of dizziness and low blood pressure. He remained at the hospital from Monday until his release that Tuesday morning. A second student, C. Payne Lewis, was taken to the student infirmary for treatment of a nose injury. As horrible as all of the injuries from the 1986 and 1980 cases sound, they are the lucky ones. They made it out of their initiation processes alive. As I mentioned in our first episode, I am in a sorority, and I understand the appeal of Greek organizations. But what we're seeing here isn't brotherhood. It's a deadly tradition that has persisted for decades despite laws, suspensions, and most tragically, deaths. When we look at Nathaniel Swinson's story alongside those of Robert Bazile and Caleb Wilson, we see more than isolated tragedies. We see a pattern of behavior that has been allowed to continue for far too long. A pattern that must be broken. Nathaniel Swinson never got to graduate. Robert Bazile never became the doctor he dreamed of being. Caleb Wilson will never get to play his trumpet at another Mardi Gras or become an engineer. Their deaths, spanning nearly 50 years but united by circumstances, force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Despite decades of warnings, laws, and tragedies, we still haven't taken hazing seriously enough. This has been Dying to Be In. I started this channel to tell these stories, not to sensationalize tragedy, but to honor the victims and hopefully prevent future deaths. To anyone considering joining a fraternity, sorority, or any organization type that practices hazing, please remember the names Robert Bazile, Nathaniel Swinson, and Caleb Wilson. Remember that no letters, no organization, no sense of belonging is worth dying to be in. If you know of a hazing story that needs to be told, please share it with me in the comments and share this channel with anyone who might benefit from this information. Because only by breaking the silence can we break the cycle. In case you haven't seen the story of Robert Bazile, I will put it here on an end screen for you to click, as well as links to it in the description box and pinned comment. My sources for this story are the Durham Sun Archives 1978 and 1989, the News and Observer Archives 1986, and the Herald Sun Archives 1987, as well as the yearbook from North Carolina Central University. That is where I was able to find the one photo of Nathaniel Swinson, whose friends called him Nate.